practitioners, policy analysts, and informed citizens all have something very important to contribute to the development of sound, evidence-based public policy. As a university president, I have to admit that I've often shaken my head at the failure of governments to look more often at the valuable research being done by university faculty on pressing issues confronting our society today. Governments, through operating grants and other means, help to fund the research being done by faculty at our 4 publicly funded universities in New Brunswick, and yet they often fail to take full advantage of the research capacity of our universities and of the high-quality research being done right here in New Brunswick. The NB-SPRN, by serving as a catalyst to identify faculty working on pressing issues and by bringing university researchers together with citizens and government to engage in dialogue, to share data, to encourage collaboration, is laying a valuable foundation for informed, evidence-based policy development in New Brunswick. And as president of St. Thomas University, which is Canada's only university which focuses exclusively on the liberal arts, on the humanities and the social sciences at the undergraduate level, and which has the largest liberal arts enrollment in New Brunswick, I also want to applaud those involved in founding NB-SPRN for recognizing the important contributions which the humanities and the social sciences have to make to enhancing our understanding of the issues confronting our world today and of contributing to the development of practical, informed, evidence-based solutions. We hear and we read constantly about the important role which the STEM subjects, science, engineering, technology, and math, have to play in solving the economic woes both of our province and of our country. But if the solution to our economic woes is to be found in the STEM disciplines, then certainly the solutions to our most pressing social problems, poverty, low literacy rates, the plight of children in care and of youth at risk, the needs and aspirations of our Indigenous communities, ways to support healthy aging and to sustain a robust healthcare system, slowing the rate of climate change, issues of public confidence in our political system. The solutions to such issues certainly require the input of disciplines such as gerontology, Native studies, criminology, environmental studies, political science, sociology, human rights, and many others. And you know, that was the understanding which inspired Frank McKenna to lend his name and to provide significant funding to the Frank McKenna Center in Communications and Public Policy at St. Thomas University. In discussion, Frank and I asked ourselves 2 basic questions. Where does good public policy come from, and why can't there be more collaboration? I don't think there's anyone today who believes that any one sector or one perspective, be it provincial or municipal governments, business, or education, has a monopoly on answers. And with the seriousness of the social and economic problems before us, we must intentionally reach out and work collaboratively. This was the understanding which underlay the establishment of the McKenna Center, and it's also why St. Thomas is part of the New Brunswick Social Policy Research Network. The network is building capacity, research capacity. It's making better use of research already being undertaken and making connections between groups which often work in silos. The same thinking brings us together for the 3rd GovMaker Conference. While government may sometimes provide the impetus, at the end of the day, it's people like you, who must provide the ideas, the direction, and the momentum. And I would say all kinds of people across all disciplines. And I have to say I was very pleased to see that St. Thomas's Dr. Kelly Bronson was on the schedule here yesterday. She's a young social scientist researching decision-making on controversial technologies, from GMOs to hydraulic fracturing. Commenting on these issues is always a delicate matter. But her research brings community values and environmental demands into the conversation with scientific and technical knowledge, and that's terribly important. There are some new realities which we all, scientists and social scientists like Dr. Bronson, are facing. Society has very limited resources to tackle the problems ahead of us. And moreover, I think the public, more than ever before, has less patience for flawed consultation processes. So learning how to do it right is a major challenge. By bringing together government, researchers, and communities, I hope that the Social Policy Research Network and GovMaker can change the way that policy is being made in our province. And at the end of this conference today, you'll have a challenge. And that challenge will be to maintain the passion and the enthusiasm that you demonstrate here, and to take away with you some of the ideas and the connections that you have acquired over the course of these 2 days, and to make use of them in your lives as citizens, as researchers, and as policymakers. I know that you're here because you understand that challenge, so I know that you're going to rise to that challenge. I hope that your second day of conference will be productive and inspiring, and I thank you for inviting me to welcome you today.
Thank you, Professor Russell, for a very passionate call to action to start our day. And thank you to the board and staff of the New Brunswick Social Policy Research Network for bringing us GovMaker every year. It is certainly an opportunity to learn and collaborate, network, that we couldn't do without. And now we are happy to present greetings from the Premier of New Brunswick, the Honourable Brian Gallant. Premier Gallant could not be with us today because of prior commitments out of the province, but he took the time to record some remarks. So, can we roll the video?
By fostering innovation, we will create economic growth, revolutionize education, and improve the delivery of services like healthcare. Harnessing open data is a big part of your government's plan to become the smart province. Welcome to the 3rd annual GovMaker Conference. A special thanks goes to the New Brunswick Social Policy Research Network for hosting this awesome open government event that brings together a diverse group of people with a common goal: to engage citizens and government in open dialogue, open data, and open collaboration. Malheureusement, je ne suis pas en mesure d'être avec vous puisque je suis présentement en route vers Madagascar pour le sommet de la francophonie. Grâce au lancement de la politique sur les données ouvertes du Nouveau-Brunswick et de notre laboratoire numérique NB+, nous sommes déjà mieux placés pour transformer les données en solutions concrètes qui améliorent notre économie et notre qualité de vie collective. New Lab also offers another fresh approach that brings together innovators and the public to address our most pressing social, environmental, and economic challenges, all through an entrepreneurial lens. La façon de protéger ces données ouvertes est un autre élément clé permettant de renforcer notre capacité à collaborer. Grâce à CyberNB, le Nouveau-Brunswick est en mesure de faire croître cette industrie de la cybersécurité de la classe mondiale et d'améliorer le perfectionnement de la main-d'œuvre, l'éducation et la recherche. Cybersecurity also presents a huge opportunity to create growth and jobs here in New Brunswick. Here's to a successful conference that brings more entrepreneurial mindset into government and enables new and creative ways to collaborate and get things done. And I have to make a special shout out to David Alston, who I know is going to help us ensure that we have a more entrepreneurial mindset in government. If you have any questions or ideas, go see David during the conference. Merci.
I'd like to thank the Premier's office for ensuring that we received the greeting and for their support of GovMaker from the start. Before we begin our agenda for the day, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items again. The washrooms are outside the door and down the hall. And again, for presenters, I would ask that you wait by the tech booth 10 minutes before your session so we can set up your microphone. And we will have timekeeping as we have another packed agenda today. And you will also see the GovMaker evaluation forms on your tables. So are they there, Lorna? No, I don't think they are there. But later today, please help us improve GovMaker by taking a few minutes to tell us what you liked or did not like or what you'd like to see in the future.
Je vous rappelle gentiment de bien vouloir éteindre les sonneries de vos téléphones cellulaires. A gentle reminder to turn off your cell phone ringers. Nous voulons remercier nos commanditaires de niveau diamant, le gouvernement du Nouveau-Brunswick, et tous nos commanditaires, le gouvernement du Canada, G-Tech, le Centre Pondeshpande, RICO, le Canada's Open Data Exchange et l'Université du Nouveau-Brunswick, et encore une fois le hashtag pour la journée GovMaker.
Now, our first keynote gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Alan Cantrow. As Senior Advisor and before that as the Chief Learning and Communications Officer of the Governance Lab, Alan has designed and delivered customized learning programs to support the work of governance innovators in both public and private sectors. In parallel, he has continued to serve, as he has for several decades, as a trusted advisor on strategy, organization, innovation, communication, and knowledge management to corporations, colleges, professional schools, universities, and government entities in many different parts of the world. He has been a visiting scholar at Sloan School of Management, MIT, and senior editor of the Harvard Business Review. After his keynote, Alan will be leading a workshop that many of us inside and outside of government have been looking forward to, Open Data Before the Checkbox. But first up, Alan will speak to us on 7 lessons for designing innovation labs that work. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Alan Cantrow.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I hope you don't mind if I wander down here rather than stand up there. It is enough of a pleasure to be with you, given what you are doing and the importance of what you are doing, that I was willing yet again to trust myself to the lovely sardine cans of Air Canada, which get me here to Fredericton from City Center. It was an interesting flight, shall we say, but happy to be with you. We're at a very, very interesting time in this work of governance innovation, where the infection is spreading, the benefits are being seen, and I think the battle over principle is largely, if not won, at least well engaged. One of the signs of this, of course, is the great and quick spread of innovation labs, which become not the only, but a major instrument in trying to drive that agenda forward. These do good and important work. They're doing it elsewhere. They're certainly doing it here. And Canada, as you well know, is very much in the forefront of nations that have adopted this innovation lab approach to trying to drive innovations in governance across a wide range of policy issues. What I would like to do is suggest to you that while the corporate sector does not have the answer to all or even perhaps most questions, there are some areas where its experience is relevant to the kinds of things you are trying to do. Not that you want to simply grab it and use it blindly, but that their learning can in fact accelerate and help focus your efforts here. And what I'd like to very quickly do is share with you a very short list of lessons from the corporate management of innovation, the R&D lab universe in the private sector, which I think would help accelerate and focus the work of innovation labs. 7 lessons. First, one of the things that we have painfully learned, and pain is real, but painfully learned over time, is that unlike invention, which can often be the happy accident of the light bulb going off at unpredictable moments, innovation is a discipline. It's not a random practice. It's not happenstance, it's not accident, it's not occasional. It is a rigorous discipline in exactly the way that you think of a discipline being. There is a body of knowledge, it expands gradually over time, there is a grooved routine of practice, there is a shared language, there is a shared and agreed on methodology, nothing set in stone, but it is a discipline where we don't make it up from scratch every day. And that replicable discipline does much not simply to ensure that every now and then we have a neat idea and get something interesting done, but that we are able to push the frontier on a recurrent and continuous basis. The idea here is to create the capability in the province and elsewhere, not just about doing a neat thing now and then, but building the capability continuously to push the frontier, continuously to innovate. That is a discipline. And I want to illustrate some of the pieces of what that discipline involves. First, in a disciplined lab, one of the things that's most important is it's disciplined. It's not random activity. So that what you are doing is not just stuff. What you are doing is planned, focused, intentional experiments. There are things you're trying. There is a theory of the case that you have about why you are trying them and not something else. There are things you know and things you want to find out, and the experiments that you're teeing up are structured and organized so that you can test and find out and prove or disprove the things that you are taking this hard look at. Which means that in a well-managed lab, it's not random, it's not accidental, it's not hit or miss. There is, for everything you do, a very, very explicit, upfront learning agenda. We know why we're doing it. We understand the downstream benefit we hope to create, but we don't know all the answers yet, and the reason it's a lab is we're trying stuff out. We are experimenting, and we are experimenting not in a cavalier way, in a disciplined, sequential way where we have our eye clearly fixed on what we are trying to learn. Will we learn stuff we hadn't planned to? Sure. And you want to remain open to the happy accident and the happy discovery. But what makes labs work well over time is that they're managed. Next lesson. There is a huge temptation, both in the private sector and God knows in your world, to get things done quickly, to turn effort and energy into demonstrable outcomes that have constituencies happy sooner rather than later. And therefore, there is always a whole lot of pressure to speed stuff up and make it go fast. Perfectly understandable. Speed matters. Speed is important. Time has value. Nobody would argue that. One of the things we know, though, from decades of research about research in the R&D world is that if there is a certain amount of overall elapsed time from the early upfront experimentation in the lab to downstream implementation in the real world, if we know what that spectrum looks like, counterintuitively, if you expand the amount of time that you spend in the upfront, upstream stages of problem definition and focusing, it actually tends to collapse and condense the overall time of the overall process. It seems like you are moving more slowly than you would like to, but the upfront work of clarity, of focusing, of problem definition, of being clear about the learning agenda, getting that stuff deeply, deeply grooved tends to have an unbelievably powerful effect on collapsing and condensing the overall time to getting good stuff done in the real world. Most of the waste doesn't happen because people are stupid, dumb, or lazy. Most of the waste happens because they're good, competent, and trying hard, but they're focused on the wrong things. And getting the clarity of focus locked in early does tend to have all kinds of collateral benefits over time. So, upstream focus, managed experiments. One of the things we also know from the R&D world in the private sector is that the work of innovation doesn't happen only in one place and then magically spread to the world. The work of innovation, by definition, involves a series of handoffs, both within an organization and across organizations, as, if you will, the technology, the idea, moves downstream into real-world implementation. We all know that. We have different names for the stages and the processes, but we all know that that sequence of handoffs takes place. When stuff doesn't work out, sometimes it's the case that the original idea was not good enough. Sometimes it's the case that the experiments were not rightly designed. Sometimes it's the case that you got a good answer, but the answer just happened to be no. It doesn't work. Most of the time, stuff doesn't work when the ingredients are all there for it to work. Again, is not because people are silly, dumb, or lazy, but because nobody had spent an adequate amount of time preparing the receptor sites for each of the handoffs. All of the focus, overwhelmingly the focus, is on developing the stuff and pushing. And very little attention goes to understanding the receiver and the environment of the receiver and what will be needed to make that graft take. And when that effort is given equal focus to the push, the level of overall success goes up dramatically. So an important lesson, not only is the upstream focus piece, but an important lesson is prepare receptor sites. You need to understand them. You need to do the work. If it's training, you need to do the training. If it's informing, you need to do the informing. If it's institutional rearrangement, you need to do that so you create the ground in which the seeds will grow. In a former life, my academic work years and years ago was in the history of Puritanism in early New England. And there's a great phrase from their view of the world where they talk about the work of preaching the Bible as sowing for the harvest. Not just scattering seeds randomly and hoping, but doing it purposefully and thoughtfully on prepared ground so that when it comes time to harvest, the harvest will be there. Receptor site preparation, critically important. 2 or 3 more important lessons. First, I think we're about 4th or 5th now on the list. First of the remaining lessons. One of the most important things, of course, that you're doing in a managed lab is you're running these experiments to learn stuff. And even when we organize to capture the learning, that's great. A typical thing that happens when the work of the lab is not as successful as it could be or should be is that we don't take an equal amount of time and put in an equal amount of effort trying to define the relevant context for what it is that we have learned. So we know that we did X and X worked, and the temptation is to say, and especially in the public sector, the temptation is to say, we solved it. It worked. Everybody should go do this. Well, no. What you've done is you've found that in a particular setting, under a particular set of conditions, with a particular set of environmental factors, this thing worked. Great. But do we know, how can we know how broadly we can generalize that lesson? We know we've learned something, but we don't often make the next effort to be clear about the context to which that lesson applies. Given where I'm standing and given the season we're in, I'm going to assume that most of you are ice skaters, or at least many of you are, and that many of your ice skating experiences, perhaps earlier in childhood, were not on well-designed rinks in city centers, but on local ponds and whatever. Who of you would, on the first cold day of winter, strap on your skates and zip immediately to the middle of the pond? Well, if you did that, you probably wouldn't be here now. That is, even if it were solid near shore, you would know enough, and God knows you all had good parents, though they would have taught you well enough, you test. You know, it's safe this far. Now we're going to test and we're going to see. Because we don't know, we can't know a priori how far the lesson extends. There's a point where it breaks down, and we don't want to get caught. In a lot of the work in labs, especially innovation labs, there isn't an adequate amount of effort spent trying to define the relevant context to which what we have learned comfortably applies, and where the boundary is, and where we might try it next, and when the question marks start to appear. And if you blindly start applying stuff that worked here over there, likelihood is it won't work all that well, or it may well not work, and then reputationally it will be hurt. It will undercut the value of the effort because you're going to be starting to generate unnecessary and avoidable failures because you're trying to use something in a place and for a thing that it wasn't really designed. So the contextualization of learning is critical. Two more quick ones. First, remember that in doing the work of a lab, in doing this work of innovation, you are not just creating a thing that you are putting out in the world that people will experience as this wonderful thing in and of itself and treat it as an isolated, standalone reality. What you are creating, whether it's policy, whether it's service delivery, whatever the work of government is that you are creating, doesn't just sit out there in a vacuum. It exists as part of complex systems that affect the way other organizations and individuals work and live and do their things. If you have not spent an adequate amount of time and attention thinking about the receptor universe that is going to need to take your stuff and use it, not just preparing the receptor site to accept it, but understanding what else needs to be true for your piece to be the effective piece of a puzzle to move an overall equation forward, it might be good in spots, but you will not begin to get the level of benefit out of what you've created that is there to be created. You can't assume that what you've invented or innovated is the only part or the only thing that matters in some solution to an important social issue. It's not clear that it's the best or cheapest. It may be a contributing piece. Understanding where and how it fits makes a huge difference in terms of whether it gets used and adopted correctly and whether the success will tend to drive increased interest and openness to the kind of stuff you're doing. Last comment. In labs, as in every area of organization management I have ever seen, the overwhelming bugbear, the thing that comes and hits you in the back of the head or bites you in an unmentioned place in the rear of your body without warning, is untested and often unconscious and implicit and unvoiced assumptions. Unvoiced assumptions are the mother of all screw-ups. They've always been the case, continue to be the case, and they're the case here as well. Some of you will recall this story because I've told it many times, but it's an important lesson and a metaphor I want to leave you with. In the early years of the Second World War, a British artillery unit was finding that it was not getting the rate of fire from the cannons it had taken out of the armories where they had been stored after the First World War. And this was of real concern because they had not many guns, and the ones they had needed to work very well. And they were very puzzled about why the guns didn't seem to be doing what they should be doing, so they sent out inspectors. And what they found was that in firing these cannon, there were 5 guys. One would aim it, one would load it, one would actually pull the lanyard to fire it, and there were 2 other guys. And all they did, one stood on either side of the gun, and before the gun was fired, they would snap to attention. And after the gun was fired, they'd go at ease. That's all they did. This seemed silly, so they asked them, why are you doing it? And like good soldiers, they said, we were trained to do it this way. So they asked the trainers, why did you train them to do this? And being good soldiers, the trainer said, we were trained to train them this way. And it became an infinite regress of this is the way it's always been done, we dare not change it, until someone had the bright idea of filming it and showing the film to old retired officers in the hopes that somebody might remember why these guys were standing there, snapping to attention, going in. Finally, some old retired sergeant says, I know what those guys are doing. They're holding the horses. An essence, a critical characteristic of effective innovation labs is that they are horseless. That is, an effort, a conscious, intentional, focused effort has been made as part of this explicit, overt discipline, which is the core work protocol for the lab, the effort has been made to identify and surface for discussion all of the assumptions on which the innovative idea and problem framing and whatever rest, so that they can be tested and validated and confirmed or disconfirmed, so that nothing they're doing, none of the commitments or investments or focuses of effort they're making, are shaped by assumptions that are invisible and tacit and that no one would agree to if they were aware of it, but because they're not aware, they go do it and horsehold in the worst kind of way. Companies tend to be horseholders too, but the management processes in companies is often a bit more aggressive about identifying horseholding and getting it to stop. Innovation work in government is hard to begin with, and the horseholding is often deeper, less immediately visible, and harder to eradicate. But boy, does it make a difference to the extent that you can focus on it as a way of freeing up the work of the lab to really follow the elements of a truly effective discipline in sustaining the work of innovation over time. Again, none of this is rocket science. None of this is stuff you've never heard of or thought of before. All of this is hard-won insight about what really does and does not work on the ground. And I promise you, all of these pieces are worth the effort to try to bake into what you do and how you do the work of labs. And they will make that effort much, much more effective, much, much more efficient, and most importantly, will raise the likelihood that that effort will contribute to the kind of social outcomes you care about sustainably over time. Let me stop with that as a quick frame. Happy to take any quick questions on this. If you want, I'm happy to steer you toward literature about the R&D process in the private sector. I've tried to spare you the academic references in this, but there is a lot of research that underlies the stuff I was talking about. I hope you found these top-level points useful. So, thank you. So, happy to respond. Yes?
What would you say is the #1 lesson that is ignored or omitted?
There are lots of them. There are two that are dominant for me, and they tend to be the, if you will, the parent errors under which a lot of other stuff falls. It's the horse holding, and it's not understanding that innovation is a discipline. It's, there are particular things that we know that we need to do, and we're going to focus on these, and just not understanding that the effort you're buying into when you do the lab thing is a sustained and rigorous, often not very sexy. It's often incremental, so you don't get the headlines every day, but it is a sustainable and robust discipline, and that tends to get ignored. At least that's been my experience. Yeah.
I'm just curious about the receptor readiness. So how, from a private sector point of view, how does the lab environment and the operations environments connect and continue to be connected?
Not always great, better than it used to, but there are a couple of things it's an excellent question, a couple of things to suggest, none of which are rocket science, but I think all of which should strike a chord. One of the things we know from all kinds of experience in technology development and innovation is that ideas travel best when they travel with people. So a thing we might do when we're managing this sequence of handoffs over time is to ensure that on the core team that's doing the upfront work are people from either the units or the entities or the constituencies or the stakeholder groups downstream to which the handoff will happen at some point, so that they become parts of the effort from the beginning, not people to whom it's thrown at some point along the way. Not just in terms of the feeling of involvement, which has huge emotional benefits, but also they have a level of understanding and preparation which makes them much more effective spokespeople for that effort when it does come into their downstream universe. So again, the notion of trying to overstaff up front, which is part of why it takes longer, does tend to collapse overall time. Yeah.
Is it not possible to
Please.
that the R&D efforts are aided by the knowledge given by those receptor sites? That they're kind of two-way streets?
Oh, of course. Oh, absolutely. Oh, God, yes. The notion that I am the manager of the lab, all things worth knowing in the universe exist in my world, and every now and then I will be nice and share some of them with you, and any idea that you might possibly have out there, since I don't have it already, is obviously not good. I mean, that is a... there was a famous don of a British university in the 19th century who was reputed to be one of those men who knew everything. There's a famous, not limerick, but piece of doggerel written about him. His name was Benjamin Jowett. My name is Benjamin Jowett. I am master of this college. If it's knowledge, I know it. If I don't, it isn't knowledge. If you run a lab that way, you miss a huge amount of value that comes from, if you will, the folk on the line who have all kinds of things to contribute, either at the level of shaping insight or perhaps even at the level of local experience, which in itself doesn't prove anything, but put together with other things that I get from other sources really allows me to see stuff that I wouldn't have, patterns I wouldn't have seen otherwise. So if we take the attitude that everything starts and stops with us, it typically stops. You're quite right. Yes?
What methods have you found effective in surfacing those implicit assumptions?
I'm sorry?
I'm just wondering if you can say something about the methods for surfacing the implicit assumptions or horse holding that you've been talking about.
It's certainly the case that most of us, although we would of course claim this is completely untrue, or certainly as it applies to us personally, would like the reputational benefit of being seen to be the source of a great idea, so that a thing that one can do in an organizational setting is make sure there's a certain amount of visibility and celebration of people who make these kinds of contributions. So, and that tends to encourage more to do that. So there is that. That works, but especially in your world, my take, and especially here in Canada, it's true elsewhere, but I find it especially true in the teams I've worked with in Canada. The thing that seems to drive folk like you, in my experience, is not personal glory, but rather that deep sense of accomplishment in having a hand in seeing important things get done. And the more that I can help your experience, add to your experience, that feeling of satisfaction, not just from knowing you contributed, but actually seeing the benefits, touching the benefits, what we find is that that tends to really generate enthusiasm at the personal level to make those kinds of contributions. So literally, the ability to go see and visit the folk whom this policy idea, when finally implemented, actually touches, and to understand that you were part of that. That level of satisfaction and contribution tends to be a real driver of effort. Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr.
A pleasure. Thank you all.
Token of appreciation.
You're very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
On va maintenant se diriger dans nos ateliers. All the workshop will be held in English, so that you know. So we have mainstreaming open government in Nakwaksis room downstairs with Jamie Boyd from Treasury Board of Canada. We have opening up dialogue in the Marysville room downstairs with Laura Wesley from the Privy Council Office, Government of Canada. And in this room, Dr. Cantro's workshop on open data beyond the checkbox. Donc, on se dirige vers nos salles et peu importe l'atelier que vous allez choisir, si vous voulez voir ce qui s'est dit dans les ateliers où vous ne serez pas, on ne peut pas se téléporter, il y aura un résumé dans cette salle-ci à 11 heures. Donc, une fois les ateliers terminés, vous pouvez revenir en haut, ramasser un café, quelque chose à grignoter et revenir dans cette salle-ci pour savoir ce qui s'est passé là où vous n'étiez pas. Donc, merci beaucoup. On se revoit tous ensemble ici à 11 heures.